What we're really talking about is receiving the gift that's offered of emotion. Emotions come and go and they go up and down because otherwise they wouldn't be any use to you. If you do the logical, reasonable, sensible things when you have very high levels of anxiety, for example, something happens that is different, that is just not even possible to model outside of human beings, which is you begin to become anxious about being anxious. Yeah, you need to learn how to feel good, but that means learning how to feel good, not how to feel good.
Learning how to be better at feeling.
We're cognitive creatures and we do the thing we do, and we turn emotion from something that's useful to something that's just a torment. Clinging to positive becomes a negative. You can sometimes cling to negative in order to avoid the unknown of what would it be like just to be you.
Welcome to Disordered. This is episode 66 of the podcast. Today we're talking about acceptance and commitment therapy, otherwise known as ACT. I am Drew Linsalata. I am a therapist in training in New York with a specialization in anxiety and anxiety disorders. I'm a 3-time author in the anxiety disorder space, an advocate, an educator, a social media dude, podcast host, clearly, and unfortunately a former sufferer of anxiety disorders and depression for many, many years in my life on and off, and even more unfortunately, a current sufferer of the flu. We are a little banged up on Disordered this week. I've got myself a swinging flu. Josh is on the road taking care of business, so it's just me behind the mic kind of limping through today. But that's okay. It's still a good episode. And it's not a good episode because I'm here. It's a good episode because Dr. Stephen Hayes is here. If you're going to talk about ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, you want to talk to Dr. Hayes because he invented it. Like, you don't get any better than that. Let's just go right to the source. I am thrilled that he agreed to come on Disordered and chat with us for a little while. I'm extremely appreciative of the time that he has made for us today. So yeah, we're going to have Dr. Stephen Hayes on in a little bit. We're going to talk about ACT. We're going to talk about the theories underneath it. We're going to talk about how it's applied in the context of anxiety disorders and recovery. And before we do that, before I bring Dr. Hayes on and get into the conversation, just a quick reminder that if you go to our website at disorder.fm, you can send us email or voicemails. Those can be questions, comments, just say hi, did it anyways. We love to share the did it anyways wins from the community. We love all the messages. We pretty much read and listen to all of them. We can't get them all on the air, but we do try our best. So head on over to disorder.fm and let us know what's on your mind. We're always happy to hear from you. So let's get to it. We're going to talk about acceptance and commitment therapy. We're going to talk about relational frame theory, and we're going to talk about that with Dr. Stephen C. Hayes. So let's get at it. Dr. Hayes, welcome to Disordered. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. Not going to lie, I'm a little starstruck. I follow your work very closely. So, and as a therapist that uses the work that you do, I appreciate you in a big way. Our audience are people that are generally dealing with anxiety disorders like panic disorder or OCD or agoraphobia, health anxiety, that sort of stuff. And acceptance-based approaches, as opposed to sort of the old school CBT, like we work on content and all that stuff. And we can get as nerdy as we want in this conversation. That's fine. They kind of love it. Is really kind of a bread and butter here. We talk about it all the time.
Right.
So one of the things that I wanted to kick off the conversation with, and again, you guys heard the intro, but if you don't know about ACT, you should learn about ACT because it's a thing. One of the things that I find is the hardest sell for people, and I understand that people want to feel better. We get that. I wanted to feel better when I was struggling. Is accepting the idea that we don't get to fix how we feel. There's no automatic, like there must be a solution to how I feel, right? There must be a way to fix it and solve it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you address that?
Well, some of the language gets in the way, and you are talking to a person who I usually say is a panic disordered person in recovery, because you learn never to say never. And the word acceptance sounds like tolerance, resignation, put up with it, just learn to live with it. Oh, what's the matter with you, you big baby? You've had so much of that thrown at yourself, and you do it to yourself in your mind, and it's not helpful at all.
Yeah.
What we're really talking about is receiving the gift that's offered of emotion. Emotions come and go, and they go up and down because otherwise they wouldn't be any use to you. It's like the light on your car that warns you that the oil is too low or whatever. They have meaning, but they have meaning in context and your history. And depending on your genetics, your history, etc., you can have more than someone else, and things come and go. If you do the logical, reasonable, sensible things when you have very high levels of anxiety, for example, something happens that is different, that is just not even possible to model outside of human beings, which is you begin to become anxious about being anxious. And being anxious about being anxious is a self-amplifying loop. It's like a tornado or something, and it just lives on its own. And the struggles that we have with the list that you just made all include a little bit, panic is an obvious one, but all of them do,
Yeah.
of not receiving the gift of emotion and allowing it to come and go and be what it is. And then, yeah, you need to learn how to feel good, but that means learning how to feel good, not how to feel good.
Learning how to be better at feeling.
Absolutely. And if you just felt good all the time, it'd be like making sure that that oil light is always showing green instead of red.
Yeah.
What good is it? It's
Yeah.
no good anymore. And it actually then almost mocks you and emotion becomes useless. But, we're cognitive creatures and we do the thing we do and we turn emotion from something that's useful to something that's just a torment. But feelings are here for a purpose. You need them, you can use them, but only if you receive the gift that's offered. And that isn't obvious to folks. I'm not trying to say, "Oh, think about it differently, and then you will like anxiety." I'm not saying anything like that. I'm
Yeah.
saying, let's allow feelings to serve the function that they came to us to serve, move the mind out of the way, and do what every other creature on the planet is able to do. Have emotions that are empowering you and supporting you and reminding you of parts of your history and what's relevant in the present,
Yeah.
and leave the rest.
I think it would be interesting. I'm guessing right now there's a few thousand people hearing, what does he mean, the gift of emotion? I'm freaking out, man. Like, how is that a gift? Like, yes, I think people would say like, oh, when I'm feeling nirvanic joy, when I look at my children, yes, that's the gift of emotion. But a panic attack, what kind of gift is that, man?
Well, at that level of extreme, when you've become anxious about being anxious and you've fed it in this false loop, this self-amplifying thing, well, you're going to need to go through a process, sometimes for many, many years if you really dialed it in. I mean, I turned the corner on panic, and I think 12, 15 years later had my last panic attack.
Okay.
And I say I'm panic disorder person in recovery because I may have another one here. Great. I don't care. And you can't make me. And if it happens, I will own up and show up, I hope,
Yeah.
knock on wood, and do what I know in my gut because I've lived it. I suspect many people who are journeying out of this or have lived it as well, is allowing that gift to happen. And what is the gift? Well, let me give you an example from my own history. Can I do that?
Absolutely. I want to hear it.
Well, I'll make a long story short, but my first, and I tell it in a TEDx talk that you can see, but my first panic attack happened in a department meeting as I was watching full professors fight early in my career, in a way, as they say in the TEDx talk, that only wild animals and full professors are capable of. And it wasn't until many years later that I really owned up and showed up and realized that part of what that panic was about was like feeling what it felt like to be 8 years old and hear my parents fighting in the other room and not knowing if I was going to come out of the room and see, my mom with blood flowing out of her nose because dad was drunk and threatening her.
Mm.
And so, conflict was really scary to me. And I had a history. But that trigger of seeing this irrational content unfold overwhelmed me in the moment. What is the gift? Well, finding that crying kid gave me the gift of softening my attitude towards my own anxieties, be more open to see the places that it shows up, and be able to connect to others when they are feeling similarly. Here's a quick one just on gift. If I could remove all anxiety from you, if I ask all the people who are listening,
Mhm.
just by magic fairy dust, you'd never, ever, ever feel any anxiety again. However, here's the little devil's warning here. If anybody you love comes to you and is afraid and anxious, you will have nothing to give them and you'll have no idea what they're experiencing.
Mm.
You're going to take that bargain?
No, I'm not taking
I
it.
don't know many people want to take that bargain.
Yeah. Yeah.
But dude, what that means is you want the wisdom that came from experiencing the emotion, but not the process of experiencing the emotion. It doesn't come that way. So if you want to know about anxiety, you're going to have to open up and see what's inside it. And I don't mean figure it out to get rid of it. I mean just be willing to allow it to ebb and flow and get out of your own way. And over a period of years, let's see where it goes. But even over a period of minutes,
Yeah.
at the bottom of my panic disorder, I shifted the direction in a matter of minutes, and I could feel immediately that it was different, that I had the capacity to feel even panic and not have it harm me. And many people listening to me right now know a little bit about that. You've made some progress, and I bet you've done it
Mhm.
by opening up a space where it's okay to be you.
Yeah. Yeah. Fully you, all of the things, including,
Wholly you,
yeah.
all of it.
Yeah. All of your humanness has to get in there. Right. So,
Exactly. And
right
that,
now, there's a bunch of people listening. They're like, he brings this super expert dude on, and just to say the same thing we hear every damn week. So there's a lot of angry people right now. But yeah, like take it from somebody with like way more street cred than Josh and I. So I appreciate you sharing what you're sharing. I love the idea that it's a gift. Sometimes I find that in this community, that can go off the rails a little. And
yeah.
what I mean is the figuring out thing. So I can't connect to why I'm having these panic attacks or why I'm having these scary, intrusive thoughts. So I
Yeah.
just spend all of my time trying to decipher them and make meaning out of them, but I can't. And so what do? How do I find the gift,
Well,
man?
yeah, one of the gifts there that even if you don't, I'm not saying figure it out and, look at the entrails of your history so that everything all makes sense in some sort of gigantic jigsaw puzzle and so forth. Now, that's a process. Some connections will be made. A
Mhm.
lot of them probably won't. You'll still probably be on your deathbed, not completely understanding yourself. Welcome to being human.
Yeah.
But can you at least see the gift that's offered of connecting you in consciousness to others who feel like you feel sometimes? That's a gift.
Yeah.
You understand something about what it's like to be human and people around you. I just gave you the little devil's bargain around that, and you decided, nah, I don't want to give that gift away.
Yeah.
Okay, that's one example, and I think there's many others. I mean, I'll give you an example in another way. How about somebody who is feeling really, really anxious and doesn't know why at a bar when they're talking to somebody? Slow it down, dude. There may be something in there. People go home with unsafe people. People make connections with people who aren't good for them. I don't mean just let your emotions decide. I mean, let it be part because, you sometimes have a sixth sense. I mean, you feel for reasons and there's something going on and it may have nothing to do with the person or it may have a lot to do with the person.
Hmm.
And if you want to see the cost, there's a thing called alexithymia, which is this place where if you've avoided your emotions enough, you eventually become pretty ignorant and you say, what are you feeling? And the answer is, I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you know it predicts all of the bad things that come very much like if I had too much anxiety? It has almost the same level of impact. I don't know.
Yep.
It's a really, really dangerous place to be. You want to be in touch with that. So what will it take to know? Well, you're going to have to feel, and you have to notice the situations in which you feel. So there's gifts beyond figuring it out and knowing the details of your history that are more immediate.
Yeah, it's interesting because what I hear in that is, yeah, whatever the negative internal experience, the emotion you're having in a moment of panic or your OCD has been triggered, whatever it happens to be, you're in a very agitated, fearful state in that moment. Yes, you are feeling that right now, just like sometimes you feel happy and sometimes you feel sad and sometimes you feel angry and sometimes you're regretful and guilty. Like it's just one of the things that we're going to experience sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's part of it. Like, well, I'm going to have to experience this too and do the best I can to experience this as best I can.
Well, and one of the things we're learning, it's not just avoiding emotions, it's clinging to emotions. And so sometimes the anxiety's not there. And I'll give you an example of one that is a pretty common experience. Is sometimes people in desperation just get to a point where saying, kill me if you're gonna. And the fog lifts for a minute.
That was me, by the way.
Yeah. And then what the mind does is, oh, I got a new trick, a new way. Kill me if you're gonna. Kill me if you're gonna. Oh, it doesn't work anymore. Oh my God, And so yet another, trip around the mulberry bush. But the point being in here is that, sometimes like clinging to positive things is not positive.
Mhm.
But there's something else here that's probably freak out half the audience. Says can't possibly be. You also kind of cling to the so-called negative because it's so familiar and you know that at least you've survived. And part of you, this primitive kind of alligator brainstem level of us says, well, what would happen if I didn't? I mean, you get almost identified with the struggle. I'm a panic disordered person. I'm an OCD person. Well, what if you're really not that?
Yeah.
What if you're a whole person? That can be a little scary. Well, then who would I be? I don't know. Would I be good? Would I be bad? Would I do things? Good question. What do you want to do in your life? So
Mm.
turns out clinging to positive becomes a negative. And then the weird one is that you can sometimes cling to negative in order to avoid the unknown of what would it be like just to be you.
Yeah. We did an episode about that early on in disorder, where anxiety becomes your identity. I have anxiety.
Yeah.
I'm anxiety. I have anxiety. Like, or do you just experience it?
When you find yourself saying I am, and then you can fill it in with agoraphobic, I'm into agoraphobic,
Mm-hmm.
it's sliding over, and we get invited to do that by our healthcare system and so forth, that stick these labels on us, without even knowing
Yeah.
really what the process is and so forth. So hold that lightly. No,
Yeah.
you're a whole person, and you have features that you can categorize, but who knows? Let's see what happens over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And be in a process of discovery, peeling back that onion, you'll never finish, as to what it'd be like to be whole and free, as just being who you are.
Yeah. Then there's the clinging to the negative, because since it is so highly charged and it feels so intense, those negative feelings are so intense, they have to mean something.
Yeah.
I fused with that thought. I'm connecting it to some real danger that doesn't actually exist, and letting go that's crazy, man. That's risky. I can't let go of that.
Yeah, it looks like almost an insane thing to do.
Yes.
And yet you're letting go of the demand that your mind gives you to figure it all out and understand it at that level, as opposed to simply being with the process and allowing. Sometimes things will show up and you make some connections, but that doesn't mean that you control it.
Right.
I mean, uh, there's a classic act metaphor, if I had a gun to your head and I say, relax or I'll shoot you, and I had a polygraph on you, then I can see if you get anxious. Guess what you're going to get?
Yeah. It's not going to
Well,
be
you
good.
do have a polygraph. It's your own nervous system, and you do have that metaphorically gun to your head of, my life's going to be awful unless, which of course is plenty to be anxious about. So now we're into being anxious about being anxious.
Yep.
And guess what you get? You get another trip around the bush.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so difficult sometimes. And I think it's that, okay, I hear you. I have to learn how to experience these things and look at emotions as all the emotions are part of me. I have to welcome them. I have to work on experiencing all of them. Cool. But in the moment when I am triggered and my OCD says that I might actually harm my child or do something bad to myself, everything goes out the window. I know you've heard that a million times. It all goes out the window, Dr. Hayes. Well, we hear that too. It all goes out the window.
Well, and one of the things that shows is that practicing the skills are better done when there's no need to practice them. You sort of groove it. And, while I've not had full blown OCD, my mom was full blown. And I only discovered within the last few years why. But I had enough that I remember sitting at a very, very tall building that had it was in a jungle. It was completely open because it didn't need air conditioning. It just needed to open all the windows. And my now 38-year-old, 35-year-old son was crawling around, and I had this tense desire to see what it would be like to throw him like a frisbee out over the forest trees. And I'm literally hanging on to the chair with a death grip for fear, so I can relate to it. I understand it. And in fact, almost everybody does, because almost everybody has that impulse when you're crossing a bridge to maybe, what would happen if I suddenly swerved and sailed off into space?
Right off the bridge.
Or here's another one. Go up to the edge of a balcony, like on the Empire State Building, and you rock. Everybody rocks.
Yeah.
Why? Because you're thinking, oh, don't leave too far forward. You might fall. And then you activate too many muscles, and then you're leaning back. So then you have to lean forward. And then you think, oh my God, I really want to jump. Look at that. I'm going. No, that's just how the mind works when you give it command instructions that are kind of the opposite. So OCD is kind of built in, anxiety's built in, all these processes are built in. And so learning how to be a whole creature who has this thing called emotion is a challenge that everybody walking around you is facing, whether they use that label of anxiety disorder or not.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you. Interestingly, like you're right. We all have those thoughts. I remember, back in, I've told this story before, standing in front of open electrical switchgear back in the day after my undergrad degree in architecture, 13,000 volts. It's humming along the bus bars, and I'm this far away from it, man. I could just reach out and grab. Like that thought goes in your
Yeah,
head.
grab
What
it.
if I just grab that? Boom, I'm done. And the guy next to me looked at me and said, "I know what you're thinking," and we laughed because every brain makes that thought. But what's interesting thing is you might have thoughts today like, "What if I quit my job and and open a restaurant?" You might have that thought too, but that doesn't bring a big like jolt of fear or an emotional charge with it. So it becomes an object, just a thought.
Well, it turns out that the predictor of sticky thoughts like that is that momentary, I can't have that. When you grab on it and say, no, 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 you have just plugged yourself into that circuit of that thought becoming very, very important. I mean, if I just said to you, don't think about a yellow Jeep, you know, you've seen yellow Jeeps before, don't think about that, or it's really, really bad. I mean, if you think about that, my goodness, your head is going to explode. Awful things will happen. You'll be sent to hell, whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do that for a few minutes, but the research on that shows then minutes afterwards, you're freaking thinking about yellow Jeeps. Why?
Yeah, that's
Well,
just the
just
way it
because
works.
it was real important not to.
It's very hard for people to get their brain around that. I think logically it's easy. Logically that makes sense. Yeah, okay, there's research, I get it, but it's so hard for me to not try to control my thought. I always say you can decide what to think, you can never decide what not to think. So, but I'm having the thoughts. I was doing so great for 4 days and then I had the thought, they came back.
Yeah.
And then they, the highest of card crumbles and they decide that they're getting worse again. So that's really hard to deal with sometimes.
Well, metaphorically, you have lots of practice with letting go where you have made progress.
Mm.
I mean, you have ridden a roller coaster and you've put your hands up. Yeah, it takes a lot of rides before you're going to ride a whole ride without your hands grabbing the bar in front of you.
Right.
And experienced roller coaster riders just love showing how great they are, keeping their hands up the whole trip, right? With enough
I don't
practice.
get it. I don't get it.
With enough practice, you can absolutely do this.
Yep.
Well, in the same way, it may take a long, long time, but with enough practice, you can float down the river and not be driven into the rocks. You can allow the water to move you. Well, you can ride the roller coaster. You can, surf the wave. There's lots of experiences in life that are physical, that are metaphors for what you need to do psychologically. And it is trial and error and practice. It isn't a rule.
Yep.
I just give you the rule, ride it and don't do this or else. Now you have two things to worry about, and it's not going to help you probably. So practice the skills when it's not at the max. There's a recent study that just came out, still last week, that looked at the variability in picking kind of strategies for dealing with emotions. But they added this piece. Did you do it only under high stress circumstances, or were you doing it when you weren't under high stress? Turns out all these different strategies plugged in at high stress predicted bad outcomes. These strategies plugged in when you weren't in high stress predicted good outcomes. So time to practice the skills that you might need to be able to show up, own up, move forward without clinging, controlling, etc.
Yeah. Otherwise they become, I feel a thing now, so I have to use this technique to stop how I feel.
Yeah, and then it didn't work, so I'll try this one, and it didn't work, and then I'll try this one, and that's not flexibility. No,
Yeah.
that's desperation.
Yeah, let's talk about flexibility for a second. That's clearly one of the hallmarks of ACT, which is going to lead to another question I get asked all the time. Well, ACT is CBT, right?
Well, it's part of the tradition, but it was so different that when it first arrived, I had to give it a name. I called it third wave CBT, and you'll see it took over the field. Everybody uses that term now.
Yep.
Because everybody knows modern CBT includes mindfulness, acceptance, values, everybody. I mean, even the late Tim Beck, a friend of mine, by the way, and, had a session talking to the Dalai Lama. I mean, so if you're thinking of CBT as old fashioned push, pull, click, click, out with a bad thought, in with a good, detect, challenge, dispute, and change. That is never how it worked. It always include elements. I can give you lots of cool examples. I mean, early CBT would do things like this. Even before we do anything, let's just notice your thoughts. Now, what do you think you couldn't do? I couldn't do this. Okay, well, here's your behavioral homework. Notice your thoughts and do that. That's in session 2 of classic CBT. Well, how is that detecting, challenging, disputing, and changing? No, what that is your thoughts are not in control of you. You can actually have the thought, I can do anything for my family. That's why I'm so depressed, and still make them breakfast.
Yeah.
You can do that. You can, you want to try it. Here's the thing. This is a crazy little thing. Can I do a technique that somebody could try?
You got the floor.
Right here in the moment.
Have at it.
All right. Well, you did a study. I'll explain the study after doing the exercise. Okay?
Yep.
I want you to get clear in your mind that something you can see around you that you could pick up, you can't pick up. I want you to just write it in your mind like it's a command instruction from the universe. I can't pick up this pen that's sitting on the desk in front of you. Don't change the thought. Really, really kind of adopt it. And then while you're thinking it, pick up the pen. You can do that, right?
I can do it. Yeah.
You can do it.
This is a trap, right? I'm thinking, is this a trick question? Like, does this dress make me look fat?
Well, now here's the experiment. So they're saying, there's a bunch of stuff in this bag. I'm going to leave the room, reach in there, pick one of the slips out of the bag and do what it says.
Yeah.
Then they leave the room. What's in the bag? A whole bunch of slips. They all say the same thing.
Oh.
What do they all say? Well, they all say, walk around the room while reading this. And then the next words are the words, I can't walk around the room. So and I forgot the words to say it out loud. Walk in the room, saying this out loud. Walk around the room, and it says, I can't walk around the room. So they have videos of it. They actually had a camera in there, and it's hilarious video to watch. People walking around. The experiment is left.
Yeah.
Saying, I can't walk around the room. I can't walk around the room as they walk around the room.
Yeah.
Well, so what? Okay, well, here's the next part of the experiment. They then are led to another room, and they say, put your hand on this hot plate. It won't actually physically burn you, but it's going to be painful. Leave it on there as long as you possibly can. If you did the little goofy thing I just talked about as compared to a control condition where you're walking around the room reading something like, I have a mother and father.
Right.
You get orders of magnitude better ability to experience the pain of the hot plate. Why? Because you tugged on Superman's cape. You poked him in the eye. You said, hey, brain, I can actually have this thought and deliberately do the opposite.
Yeah.
Well, that's right in traditional CBT, and it's in ACT in spades.
Yeah.
Because what we're trying to do is produce a bit of freedom so you can have thoughts, many different thoughts, without necessarily having to do anything with any of them.
Yeah.
Make that be a choice, but allow yourself to think in a free and open way. There's many, many, many different things to think. And when you get in a groove and you say, I just can't do anything, oh my God, you've got a freedom thing right there of disobeying the thoughts that are in front of you and then allowing yourself to think more freely.
Yeah.
Can I follow that up with a little thing? It's kind of an addendum on thoughts.
I'm going to just back away from the mic. I'm loving this. Have at it.
All right. Well, here's something that if you get into a groove and you're thinking, man, I just don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. I can't think of anything. Okay. So I did a little math on this. How many words does the actual average person know? Then I did the thing of what is the simplest sentence? And then what does a sentence contain? It has a couple of things in some sort of relationship, this and that, doing that. You need 3 or 4 words. And then I asked the question, okay, so how many sentences could you create from just what you know in your mind right now? How many different command instructions, thoughts could you create? And when I did the math, the answer was more than there are molecules in the universe.
Yeah, it's infinite, practically.
All right, so you're living in the cognitive groove, and you're thinking, the only option I've got, dude, you have an infinite number of things you could think and do. I'm not saying that to shame you or blame you. I'm just saying when you do something like walking around the room, I can't walk around the room, or what you just did, picking up that pen or whatever you did while thinking that you couldn't.
Yeah.
You're just demonstrating to your mind you're not in control. And then the next step is, okay, well, what else could I do, think, remember, etc.? Let's open it up. Let's get some air in the room.
Yeah.
And let's try some things that you haven't tried before. There's 1,000 different things to try with anything that you're struggling with. But be careful of the agenda. If the agenda is to get out as opposed to getting in, that's an agenda your mind doesn't know how to accomplish. We're back to the yellow Jeep.
Yeah, that's true. And it, you mentioned that flexibility thing. That's, you have to start to put a crowbar between you and that groove. I love how you use the word, you're in a cognitive groove. Well, I got to hop out of that groove a little bit.
You got to hop out of the groove. If you're in the rut, and the rut holds you, just like if you had, tires on a path there through your back field and you'd allowed a real rut to happen, you're going to have to really speed up and jerk hard to get out of that rut if you're driving down it. So, but getting out of the rut is that counterintuitive stuff that's inside ACT, some of the stuff that looks a little goofy, crazy, etc. A lot of that is about just bumping you out into something new so that you can create a new pathway forward.
Yeah, I think the common response to something like that is, okay, I thought about a pen. I don't care about that. But what about when I think that I'm having a stroke because this is my 10,000th panic attack. And once again, I believe this time it's a stroke. Right. I can't take the risk with that thought. But I think part of that beginning to build that flexibility and getting yourself steering hard to get out of the rut is at some point we have to at least consider the possibility that we might be wrong about that.
Yeah, exactly. To allow the possibility, what will happen if you're in the groove. What you don't know is what will happen if you're out of the groove, almost by definition, because that's the places you haven't gone before.
Yeah.
So what would happen if you treated your thoughts in a more playful way? Take somebody who's really struggling with OCD, for example. One of the things you're probably going to want to do is exposure to jump out of the rut. I'll give you an example of my own OCD thoughts. Mm-hmm. My mom, who was a clinical OCD, and I mentioned I only learned within the last few years that she blamed herself for her mother's death. And that's a story that we might get into. And now I understand my childhood. Yeah. I understand why she was washing her hands till it bled, because she blamed herself for her mother's death. But I've got enough of that training, and watch out for the poison and all the stuff I was constantly reminded of as a kid because of her fears, that if I go into a public restroom and I'm walking out, grabbing that handle and opening that door with all those folks who are just wiping their butt, and then what am I going to do? Well, if the thought shows up and gets sticky, what I do is I put my fingers in my mouth, and it's just flipping off. Superman has said, "You're going to torment me with that? Here's what you get."
Yeah, right. Exactly. Go ahead, kill me, take me down. I don't get this. This is what I think of you.
I'm licking my freaking. Now, what I advise here's public health idea. Always, when you come out of a bathroom, lick your fingers. No. I'm just saying
you are never going to be allowed in a restaurant ever again. Clearly,
I'm just saying it's worth the risk in order to have the freedom to be able to say to that mind of mine, you are not in charge, dude. And I am not going to let you be in charge. And if you try to get in charge, here's what you get. It turns out it's a little more cautious about threatening you when you do that. But if you can follow then with some playful things, like I'll give you an example there of, again, with those OCD kinds of things of, let's say you've had a thought that if you have a magical thought, you're somehow going to harm somebody. This shows up in your development. Don't step on a crack, you'll break your grandmother's back. There's a phase in life when you were a kid where words are so magical that you really think if you think something, it's going to accomplish it. And so try out breaking the rules in some way, like, I hope I develop a dread disease, and say it out loud.
It's so
your
hard.
Mind is not going to like
it.
No. Right. But you can play with it. And there's 1,000 things like that you can do that are unlike the licking your finger ones, there is some risk. It
Yeah.
could be a bad.
Yeah, maybe think that one's through a little bit,
It's
but
a
okay.
really funky risk. Don't try this at home.
Yeah.
But can you see how you could start playing with your thoughts? Not to get a specific thought to go away, then that plugs into the amplifier.
Mhm.
But if instead, as a kind of declaration of independence, I can have thoughts and I can think them without being them, doing them, following them, resisting them, fighting with them, complying with them. No, I can just have them
Yep.
as one of a gazillion things, more thoughts than the molecules in the universe. There's another one.
Yep.
And play with it enough that now I can, deliberately create a variety of thoughts and then take what's useful and leave the rest.
Yeah, fair enough. I like to try and teach people to recognize when there's the combination of thoughts and emotion. That's where you get into trouble. That's when you draw the conclusion. No, that thought I can't be playful with. If you can notice that you're having that thought that you don't like, and it comes with a big emotion, there's a really good chance that's why it feels too dangerous to challenge or play with. But since when are your emotions a good predictor of anything? Since when?
You detect the pattern. And early on in ACT, it's a little harder to sneak up on people now because they've read so much about it and so forth. But I would just ask, and what have you done to try to solve this problem? But I wouldn't define what you mean by solve this problem. And people give 101 things that they've done. But then you'd point out that every single one of them was designed to, quote, solve the problem by subtracting or eliminating or getting rid of.
Yeah.
There's no delete button in your nervous system, dude. As the joke goes, sort of a frontal lobotomy or a bottle in front of me. And don't pray for brain injury. This is not something worth praying for.
Sure.
When you're dead, you won't feel. And maybe if you had a rough brain injury, you wouldn't have that thought, but that's not something to pray for. But your nervous system is designed to work on addition only. It's not healthy to subtract your history. And as creatures with a long history, we know that. We don't want to forget. We want to remember. And we're wired to do that. I mean, even if you've forgotten something, you can learn it again faster than if you ever learned it in the first place. You could completely forget it. You can learn it again anew. So it means it's still there.
Yeah.
It's in your nervous system. So what are you going to do when none of the subtract, eliminate agenda can work? Well, you're going to do what human beings have done for eons, which is learn how to be human.
Yeah.
Learn how to ride this tiger of this social primate who invented this thing called symbolic language. Your dog and cat don't do it. You do. That means you're going to die. You can predict things in the future. You can ruminate about the past. Some of those skills are useful to us. They're why we're able to talk across thousands of miles right now. But they also are a torment when we don't learn how to manage this amazing ability to have more thoughts that are possible than our molecules in the universe.
Yeah, that's where we take that talk about a gift. I mean, you're right. So that's what puts us at the top of the food chain. That's symbolic and abstract thinking, but then it goes off the rails. So maybe part of recovery is like learning when you can use that and when it doesn't belong.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. We're going to learn, take what's useful and leave the rest. And when you do that, when you put a leash on the logical, reasonable, sensible part of you, the problem-solving part of you, you'll find there's other things you can do with that. I'll give you an example. If there's an amazing sunset tonight, you can look at it and say, wow. You're probably not going to look at it and say, and it would be even better if it wasn't pink and more blue, and if that cloud was shaped like this, and there were more wind or less wind. That would take, that would take the wow out of the moment, the awe out of the moment, and you don't go there. Well, could you do the same wow with your own history, with your own ability, with your own life, with your own awareness? I mean, you've been given a gift of feeling, of remembering, of thinking, of creating, of valuing, of doing. And yeah, the gift that gave you that, or the thing that gave you that symbolic, also gives you the temptation to run away, to hide, to cling, to judge, to find yourself inadequate, to be ashamed, to be fearful. If people knew who you were, that they wouldn't really want to be with you, and on and on and on and on. Yeah. It gives you that side too. They're two branches from the same tree.
Yeah.
And so time's up. You're going to have to figure out how to put a leash on the mind and learn how to use some other parts of your mind and things that even go beyond your mind that are more intuitive and implicit to be able to create a life worth living.
That's an entire other podcast episode that maybe we'll do one day if you have the time. But one of the most interesting things when I was first reading the original ACT book, and it's a thick read, that's not like, if you're an anxious person, don't read that book. That's for therapists and things like that. Oh, you can, I guess. But one of the great statements in that book was something to the idea that like one of the greatest things that ever happened to us was language. And one of the worst things that ever happened to us was language,
exactly.
So that I find is fascinating. And it does play into like, well, this is part of why you feel that thought is special and everything goes out the window. Maybe we'll talk about that some other time, but this is amazing. You have anything you want to add, finish with?
Well, if you're struggling with it, this is a sign that you're human. We haven't been at it very long. I mean, Homo sapiens is only a few 100,000 years old, and maybe the Neanderthals did some, but we know that the chimps didn't, because when we test them, they're just not even doing what your 6-month-old baby is doing when it enters into language. And if they don't do it, they won't. And so be a little kind to yourself. We don't come with a rule book. This is hard. And the one other thing, can I just not sound like reassurance? Can I say something that will sound like reassurance, but it's not?
Yeah.
If you're struggling with anxiety and stuff, if you stepped into the hole of it, you have a chance to do what a lot of folks around you are not going to do, which is to really do a deep dive into what it's like to be human. Because the alternatives for you is living inside the hell of spinning down into a hole of all the kind of different disorders that we can go into.
Mm-hmm.
That's an opportunity. Look around you. And on the other side of it, you will know things that will be helpful to your children and the people around you. And, it'll soften you. So I'm not meaning to reassure, but I'm saying you're being given an opportunity here to do it, to a deeper dive, because you were one of the ones who said, no, I'm going to do this. And then you stepped into the hole. Now you get to be the ones who'd say, okay, well, now that I'm here, what would it take for me to walk out? And when you've learned that, look around you, you're going to see a lot of folks who've done that. There are people on this podcast who made progress, and it's made through deliberate exposure, pulling on Superman's cape, the way I was just talking about in here, and learning that your thoughts are not the boss of you.
Yeah. And I think it's so important. The only thing I'll add to that is, you're working on this because you have a diagnosed anxiety disorder or whatever, call it what you want. It doesn't matter.
There it is.
But this goes so far beyond that. And I always say, were those horrible experiences in my life? Yeah, they definitely were. Would I do them again? I might, because the things I learned through this process make me who I am now. And I like it. Yeah. So I know that doesn't help you if you're struggling today.
It doesn't.
I think you have two people that you can rely on now. I think that might say, would you feel the same way? Like, did you learn? You
Absolutely. Yeah. And when you use that to compare and say, oh, well, then that means I'm even more broken because other people could slow down, notice what your mind is doing. Now, can we apply these same skills to that? And apply it when you're not in the throes of it. That was one takeaway message. These skills are there to be learned and will be learned, are a challenge for everybody. It's just that you got the challenge a little earlier and a little more intensely. Other people, maybe when they begin to face mortality or when somebody close to them has died, but you're going to have challenges in life, or you get an illness. Okay. You had this thing called an anxiety disorder. All right. But it's way more than that. And inside this is a precious gift that if you can go there and learn what's to be learned, your life will be transformed in a way that is positive and helpful in every area of your life.
That was great. That was great. Thank you so much. I cannot tell you how much I enjoyed this conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Don't read the original ACT book, but there is one, A Liberated Mind, that walks through this whole thing. And you may have seen that one. And that is my attempt to sort of summarize 40 years of work of ACT.
Yeah, that first book is a tough, it's a great book, but it's a tough read, or at least it was for me. But,
yeah, it can be. Yeah. You're talking to a geek.
Oh, that's okay. That's my jam though.
Get Out Your Mind Into Your Life is my easy one. But if you get more curious, it's a harder read, but I try to tell that personal story and some of the science stories, how we've worked on this.
I will come back and wrap this up in a minute. Thank you so much, Dr. Hayes. You're welcome here anytime.
Thank you.
Okay. Flu or not, that was great. I don't mean that I was great. I'm gasping for air over here. I don't know how you guys put up with me, but Dr. Hayes was awesome. Like, I was not expecting at some point in 2024 to be talking to Stephen C. Hayes, but yet here I am. And thank you again to Dr. Hayes for taking the time to do that. It was kind of a thrill for me professionally, for sure. And I think this was full of good information that we could use. If you would like to know more about Dr. Hayes and his work, you can go to Stephen C. Hayes, that's HAYES.com, or just go to disorder.fm/66. And I will put all the links to Dr. Hayes' stuff and ACT resources and all that good stuff right on the page for this episode. If you're digging the podcast, maybe head on over to Spotify or Apple Podcasts and write us a review or leave a 5-star rating, especially if you're in the US, because we cannot let the British listeners take the lead here, guys. That is simply not acceptable to us. And those of you who have submitted such lovely reviews and high ratings on those platforms, thank you so much. And for everybody who sends in Did It Anyways and questions and comments, voicemails, just says hello, sends us funny jokes, we love it. Thank you so much. You make Doing Disordered so much more fun for both of us. Josh will be back next week here in the studio. We don't have a studio. We just restream over the Atlantic. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for hanging out. I hope you guys got something out of this. We will see you next week in episode 67. Take care.